It began with a file. Tokyo, late 1943. The air was heavy with smoke and pride. Inside the Naval Ministry, a group of officers leaned over a thin stack of papers stamped confidential. The seal read, F6F Hellcat, U.S. Navy fighter. The report had come from South America through the Japanese intelligence network. It claimed to reveal everything about America's new aircraft. According to the file, the F6F was slow in climb, unstable in turns, and inferior to the Zero in agility. It described the plane as a heavier version of the outdated Wildcat. The conclusion was simple: no threat to Japanese air dominance. Commander Hiroshi Takano closed the folder and smiled. "Then the sky still belongs to us," he said. That smile would cost thousands of lives. Because the report was wrong. Every number, every confident phrase, every conclusion wrong. The F6F Hellcat was not a failure. It was the weapon that would erase Japan's illusion of superiority. Across the ocean at the Grumman factory in Bethpage, New York, men worked through the night. Engines roared. Sparks lit the hangars. They were building something meant to end the war. A fighter faster, stronger, deadlier than anything Japan had ever faced. The Americans called it the Hellcat. By the summer of 1943 it was ready. The first squadrons took off from carrier decks under Pacific sunlight. Their wings gleamed blue over endless water. Inside each cockpit sat a pilot trained by hard lessons, flying a machine born from failure and perfected by precision. But in Tokyo the intelligence said otherwise. Japanese spies in Argentina, Chile, and Switzerland had all reported the same. The new American fighter shows little improvement over previous models. The Empire believed them. They always believed what confirmed their greatness. The lie spread through every layer of command. Engineers marked the Hellcat as slow in acceleration. Strategists filed it under limited range. Pilots were told to fight it the same way they had fought the Wildcat, close, fast, tight circles. They were preparing for a ghost that no longer existed. When the first encounters came over the Gilbert Islands, the mistake became visible. Japanese pilots climbed to intercept. They expected sluggish machines. What they found were monsters. The Hellcats didn't turn. They didn't dodge. They dove from the sun and killed from above. In the air, seconds decided everything. The Zero twisted, but the Hellcat climbed again before it could be touched. Heavy, armored, unstoppable. For every one Hellcat lost, dozens of Japanese fighters vanished into the sea. Tokyo refused to believe it. The reports were rewritten. Weather conditions, they said. Pilot fatigue. The numbers lied and the Empire believed the lie. But the sky doesn't lie. Within months, the Pacific belonged to the Hellcat. And the men who once laughed at that 4-page report were left to watch their empire burn beneath the truth they had chosen to ignore. Before the war, Japan's spies had been everywhere. They watched, they listened, they collected pieces of a puzzle they could never fully see. In the years before 1941, the intelligence web stretched from California to Buenos Aires. Diplomats, businessmen, students, each carrying fragments of the enemy's secrets. It worked once. It worked when America was careless, when the Zero ruled the sky. But by 1943 the world had changed and Japan didn't know it. After Pearl Harbor, America locked its doors. Consulates closed, networks collapsed, agents vanished. The Empire's vision went dark. But Tokyo still demanded answers, reports, numbers, proof of superiority. The spies had to deliver something. And so, they began to invent. The first reports on the F6F Hellcat came from South America, passed through coded cables and whispered channels. An agent in Buenos Aires claimed the new American fighter used a modified Wildcat frame, a heavier engine, and limited agility. Another, working in Chile, wrote that the Hellcat cannot match the Zero's climb or turning radius. Both reports were copied, summarized, and sent to the Naval General Staff in Tokyo. By the time they reached the top, the words unconfirmed had disappeared. The data was now official. Inside the Air Technical Bureau, engineers built their analysis around those numbers. They believed the Hellcat was just another variant of what they had already defeated. Some even laughed at the idea that America could produce a machine superior to the Zero. They had built their myth too well to destroy it. The truth was simpler and far more dangerous. At Grumman, the Hellcat wasn't designed to match the Zero, it was designed to kill it. Heavier, faster, armored like a tank with wings. Its massive engine gave it power to climb through combat instead of circling inside it. American pilots were told, "Don't turn with them. Rise above them. Hit once and disappear." But Tokyo never heard that doctrine. They only heard what they wanted, that the enemy still played by the old rules. By early 1944, these illusions had become doctrine. Japanese officers briefed new pilots with confidence. "The Hellcat is inferior in maneuvering," they said. "Attack from below, force it into turns." They handed them diagrams based on false intelligence, diagrams that led them straight into death. The first real encounter came over the Marshall Islands. A squadron of Zeros intercepted what they believed were Wildcats escorting bombers. The formation looked familiar: slow, deliberate, and easy kill. They dove in. But as soon as they entered range, the American planes climbed straight up. The Zeros followed and stalled. The Hellcats rolled over, dived, and opened fire. 4 Zeros disintegrated in seconds. The surviving pilots returned shaken. They reported an aircraft faster than anything they had ever faced, able to climb like a rocket and absorb their bullets without breaking. The officers dismissed it as exaggeration. Fatigue, they wrote. Inexperience. The intelligence could not be wrong. The system could not be wrong. In Tokyo, the reports kept coming. Dozens of engagements, dozens of losses, the same description repeated: dark blue, broad wings, impossible speed. Some said it wasn't a Hellcat at all, that America had built something even newer. Others whispered that the Empire's spirit was fading. But in the intelligence rooms, behind locked doors, the conclusion never changed. The F6F is an evolutionary step, not revolutionary. No need for alarm. It was more than pride. It was survival. In an empire where bad news was betrayal, lies became protection. Reports were edited to please superiors. Numbers were rounded down. Losses were hidden behind words like incomplete sortie and mechanical failure. A lie told to preserve dignity. A lie that killed thousands. By the summer of 1944, the U.S. Navy had filled the Pacific with Hellcats. They launched from carriers, from atolls, from any piece of flat ground they could find. The sky itself had changed color, the blue of American steel replacing the silver of Japan. Yet inside the Intelligence Bureau, the maps still glowed with red ink. The empire was shrinking, but on paper, it still looked vast. When pilots returned from missions with stories that contradicted the official data, they were told to rest, to reconsider what they'd seen. The word impossible became policy. No one dared say that the Zero was obsolete. No one dared speak the truth. Even as the losses mounted, the empire believed. Belief is powerful. It can build armies. It can start wars. But when belief replaces truth, it becomes a weapon turned inward. The Japanese spies who once gathered data with precision now served a different purpose. Not to inform, but to reassure. Their cables became instruments of comfort, feeding Tokyo the version of the world it wanted to hear. One message from a surviving network in Portugal read: American aircraft manufacturing limited by quality issues. Hellcat still under modification. Another claimed, engine overheating persists. Both were lies. Both were copied into official records. The Hellcat by then was dominating every major engagement. The Battle of the Philippine Sea turned into a massacre. Japanese pilots called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Hundreds of planes fell in a single day. The air was filled with fire and disbelief. The same officers who had dismissed the Hellcat now stared at reports that made no sense. Loss ratios so extreme they seemed impossible. But they were real. And every death in that sky began with a single false figure typed into a report 2 years earlier. In the war's final year, the Intelligence Bureau no longer produced confidence. It produced silence. The numbers had become undeniable, and still no one dared to rewrite the truth they had created. The illusion that began with a file from Argentina now ended in ashes across the Pacific. For the men who believed in the Zero, reality had finally arrived, painted blue, armed with 6.50 caliber guns and wearing the name Hellcat. The first whispers came from the front lines. Pilots who survived began to speak in low voices about a new American fighter that didn't fly like anything they knew. It didn't dance. It didn't dodge. It climbed like thunder and struck like a blade. They said it came out of the sun and disappeared back into it before a shot could even be fired. They called it a machine without weakness. The reports reached Tokyo in fragments, coded, confused, Impossible. Each line contradicted the intelligence files. Enemy aircraft superior in climb. Armor withstands 20 mm shells. Cannot outturn. Outruns all interceptors. The analysts circled the words, crossed them out, and wrote unverified. They told themselves the pilots were tired, frightened, exaggerating. They told themselves the Empire still ruled the sky. But in the Pacific, the sky had already changed sides. By early 1944, the F6F Hellcat was everywhere. It flew from carriers that moved like cities across the sea. It guarded bombers, hunted submarines, cleared the air for invasion fleets. The Americans had built it for one purpose: to erase Japan's air force from existence. And it was working. Commander Takano sat in his office, reading a report from Saipan. 40 Japanese fighters lost in one engagement. The Americans lost 3. He stared at the ratio until the numbers blurred. The name Hellcat appeared again and again, each time followed by a phrase that made no sense to him: superior climb, unbreakable armor, instant recovery. He looked at the intelligence file beside it, the one that said the Hellcat was limited in maneuverability and unsuitable for prolonged combat. He realized they couldn't both be true. The door opened. A junior officer entered with another report. Takano didn't read it. He simply asked, "Is this one different?" The officer hesitated, then shook his head. Takano nodded. He knew what that meant. The war had turned and Tokyo was still blind. Out in the Pacific, the Hellcat was rewriting every law of air combat. The Zero had been born in an age of grace, light, precise, elegant. The Hellcat belonged to a new world, heavy, armored, relentless. It didn't need elegance. It needed endurance. It could absorb punishment, fire back, and still climb away untouched. The Americans had traded art for industry and they had won. Over the Philippine Sea, the difference became undeniable. Waves of Japanese aircraft rose to intercept the U.S. fleet. They flew with the same courage, the same discipline, the same faith. But courage could not change physics. One by one the Zeros fell. Gun camera footage from the Hellcats showed streaks of light, explosions, shadows tumbling into the water. The Americans called it a turkey shoot. The Japanese called it impossible. When the few surviving pilots returned, their faces were blank. They spoke of blue wings that dove like hawks and vanished like ghosts. They said they never even saw their attackers. Commanders accused them of cowardice. "You must have fled," one said. "No aircraft can do what you describe." The pilots bowed, silent. They had nothing left to say. At the Intelligence Bureau, engineers began to question the data. One of them, Lieutenant Morimoto, asked permission to investigate captured wreckage. He was denied. "The reports are accurate," his superior said. "Do not waste time chasing American lies." But Morimoto had seen the gun camera footage, the speed, the patterns. He knew. The Hellcat wasn't a rumor. It was evolution. When Japan finally captured a damaged Hellcat near Truk, the truth could no longer be denied. The wreck was hauled into a hangar, its fuselage torn but intact. Mechanics walked around it in silence. They touched the thick armor, the reinforced wings, the massive engine housing. It looked nothing like the Wildcat. It looked like a weapon designed by a world that understood the future. Morimoto wrote his findings. Top speed exceeds 370 knots. Rate of climb unmatched. Armament sufficient to destroy any Japanese model. He presented them to his superior, who read the report and said nothing. Then he folded it, placed it in a drawer and locked it. When Morimoto asked what would happen next, the officer answered, "Nothing. It changes nothing." In that moment, the Empire sealed its fate. The truth was there, written in front of them, but no one dared to speak it. The culture of obedience had become a cage. The intelligence network that once gathered the secrets of nations now served only to repeat its own propaganda. Outside, the air raids began. The same Hellcats that had ruled the Pacific now escorted bombers over Japan itself. They flew through smoke and fire, untouched by the flak below. From the ground, people looked up and saw the symbol of their own blindness passing overhead, the blue silhouette they had dismissed as no threat. Takano watched from his office window as Tokyo burned. The city that had once mocked American engineering now glowed orange against the night. He thought of the first report, that 4-page file that had promised superiority, that had promised control. He realized it wasn't a document. It was a mirror, and in it they had seen only what they wanted to see. The war in the air was over. The empire just didn't know it yet. By 1945, the illusion was collapsing faster than the empire itself. Japan still sent pilots into the sky, but they were no longer fighting for victory. They were flying into inevitability. The F6F Hellcat now owned every inch of air above the Pacific. It flew from carriers that covered the horizon, from bases carved into coral, from the decks of ships Japan could no longer reach. Wherever the sun rose, its shadow followed. The empire called it strategy. The pilots called it death. Each mission began with the same lie. The officers would brief them with old charts and outdated tactics. The Hellcat cannot turn inside a zero, they said. Its engine overheats. Its pilots are clumsy. The young men nodded, saluted, and climbed into their aircraft. None of them came back. The Hellcat didn't turn. It didn't need to. It climbed above the fight and struck once like a hammer. Its heavy armor absorbed bullets that would rip through a Zero's thin frame. Its guns shredded aluminum and flesh in the same burst. From the ground, the sky looked like it was raining fire. The battle over Okinawa was the final confirmation. Japan threw everything it had left, hundreds of fighters, dive bombers, and kamikaze planes. They flew into a storm of American metal. The Hellcats met them head-on, cutting through the swarms with mechanical precision. Pilots spoke of moments where the air was filled with nothing but falling wings and smoke. The sea below burned with oil and bodies. Inside the Japanese Intelligence Bureau, no one spoke of victory anymore. The reports were short now. One line. Two at most. Losses heavy. Enemy aircraft dominant. Morale low. But even these words were rewritten before they reached command. The empire could not accept reality even as it burned. In Tokyo, the same men who had once laughed at the Hellcat reports now sat in silence. The noise of the city had changed. No longer the hum of industry, but the distant rumble of bombs. Commander Takano walked through the ruins of the naval ministry, past shattered windows and the smell of ash. The air was thick with defeat. He stopped in front of the intelligence room. The same table. The same chair. The same folder, now yellowed and torn. The original report still inside, the same 4 pages that began it all. He read the first line again. The F6F Hellcat is slow, unstable, and unfit for carrier operations. He read it until the words lost meaning. Then he whispered, "We did this to ourselves." Outside, the sound of engines filled the distance. The same sound they had ignored for years. The same machine they had called useless now circled above their capital. It wasn't just a fighter. It was a message written in steel. The Empire's final defense came not from courage, but from desperation. Pilots without fuel were sent to crash into ships. Boys barely trained were told their deaths would redeem the sky. But redemption never came. The Hellcats moved in waves, precise and endless. Every kamikaze dive met a wall of tracers. Every final mission ended in the sea. In one of his last memos, Takano wrote, "Our aircraft are brave, but bravery cannot pierce armor. The enemy's design is stronger than our faith." The memo never left the building. It was filed away under operational commentary. By the time American forces reached Okinawa, Japan's air power no longer existed. What remained were remnants, scattered squadrons, broken engines, the ghosts of an idea that had once ruled the sky. The Hellcat had done what it was built to do. It had erased the Zero, dismantled Japan's belief in invincibility, and proven that engineering could conquer ideology. For every Zero that rose, a Hellcat waited above it. For every pilot who believed, a machine answered with fact. When Emperor Hirohito finally spoke to his people in August 1945, the sky above was filled with American planes. Some were bombers. Some were Hellcats. The same blue wings that Japan's spies had once dismissed now hovered silently over a nation in ruins. The broadcast crackled through radios across the country. His words were calm, distant, heavy. He spoke of endurance, of suffering, of bearing the unbearable. To those who listened, it sounded less like surrender and more like awakening. The empire had built itself on faith. Now it was forced to live in truth. The truth that numbers matter more than pride. That information can win or lose a war. That a single false report can shape the fate of millions. When the fires died, when the silence returned, the Hellcat still flew. Above Okinawa, above Tokyo, above the ghosts of every false assumption. It had become more than an aircraft. It was a consequence. When the war ended, the silence felt heavier than the bombs that had fallen. The airfields were empty now. The hangars echoed with nothing but the wind. Japan's pilots were gone, its factories shattered, its empire erased. The Zero, once the symbol of invincibility, stood in rust and dust, its wings folded like a prayer that no one would answer. In an abandoned office in Tokyo, a stack of papers still lay on a desk. Faded ink, crumpled corners, the same words that had started everything. The F6F Hellcat presents no major threat. A single sentence that had become prophecy, not because it was true but because the empire believed it. American officers found that file months later. They didn't laugh. They read it quietly as if holding the bones of a dead idea. One of them said, "They didn't lose to us. They lost to this." He tapped the paper with his finger. A lie. The Hellcat never needed fame. It wasn't beautiful and it didn't have to be. It was the machine that ended illusion. Built not from pride but from correction. Every bolt, every angle, every adjustment born from lessons paid for in blood. The Americans had learned from failure. The Japanese had denied it. That was the difference. In the years after surrender, Japan's surviving engineers began to study the wreckage they once despised. They measured every piece of the Hellcat, its armor, its balance, its simplicity. They found logic where they had once seen arrogance. They learned that strength was not in myth, but in refinement. The same engineers who once misread the enemy's designs would one day rebuild their country through precision. From those ashes rose a nation that finally understood that perfection begins with acceptance of imperfection. But for those who lived through it, the memory remained. They remembered the arrogance that had turned truth into comfort. The briefings that promised victory while reality screamed outside the window. They remembered the sound of the Hellcat's engine, that low hum before impact, the sound of truth approaching. Commander Takano's name was never seen again. Some said he walked into the ruins the day of surrender and never returned. Others claimed he survived under a different name, living quietly, haunted by reports he once signed. What remained of him were his notes, fragments, thoughts written on the edges of maps. One line survived time and translation: "We believed the world as we wished it to be, and so it became our grave." The Hellcat outlived the war. It fought again in Korea years later, still carrying the same confidence, the same roar that once shook the Pacific. It became a symbol not of victory but of adaptation. It proved that progress belongs to those who question themselves first. Decades later, in a museum far from the Pacific, two aircraft hang side by side. The Zero, light, elegant, fragile. The Hellcat, thick, scarred, unyielding. Their wings almost touch, their silence eternal. A guide explains their story to a crowd, but the truth doesn't need words. It sits in the air between them, the cost of arrogance, the price of ignorance, the victory of reality. Wars are not only fought with weapons. They are fought with information, with the stories men tell to protect their pride. Japan's greatest defeat began long before the first battle. It began the moment truth became negotiable. The moment numbers were twisted into hope. The moment the empire stopped listening to the world and started listening only to itself. The Hellcat was just an airplane. But history made it more. It became the embodiment of consequence, the shape of truth forged in metal. Every empire believes it is eternal, until a single machine, built by those who chose to see clearly, tears through that illusion and leaves silence behind. When the sky finally cleared and the fires stopped burning, the world exhaled. The oceans were calm again. The air was still. Above it all, somewhere beyond the clouds, the echo of engines faded into history. The war had ended. The illusion had died. And the truth, steady, undeniable, and absolute, remained. An empire built on pride had fallen to a machine built on facts. The F6F Hellcat did not just win a war. It proved that in the end, truth always climbs higher than belief.